January 1st, 2007, Thomas Grip and Pers Nilsson. No, wait, I got that wrong, my bad. Jens Nilsson. They founded Frictional Games. Now, prior to this, the two worked on a long-canceled game called Unbirth. Nice, got one early this time. Now, less than 4 months from the founding of their company, Frictional releases their first game, Penumbra Overture. And they were quickly establishing themselves as a real player in the horror genre. And then in 2010, Amnesia: The Dark Descent is released. And it was met with very positive reviews from both critics and players alike. Now in 2015, Kotaku had listed Amnesia as the best horror game. I don't know what they're basing their... Well, in typical Kotaku fashion, they blundered the list by not having Alien Isolation #1 and Dead Space #2. All this to say, Amnesia was and still is kind of a big deal. It forever changed the landscape of the survival horror genre. And in many cases, its influence goes completely unnoticed, specifically because it was an indie game. It was the seminal first-person horror survival game, and it paved the way for the atmospheric, story-driven horror games that we know and love today in ways that quite possibly will be felt till the end of civilization. Now, initially, I had a very hard time playing Amnesia. This was not my first time trying to play Amnesia. The first time I tried to approach it, I did so much like I would have approached Alien Isolation or Dead Space. I didn't bother reading any of the text tips as I was just ready to get into the action. And having finally gotten through the game, I am embarrassed to admit that all the playthrough I've done before this, I've never made it past or even to the old archives, partly out of fear and partly out of frustration. But I have now since beaten the game, and I am here to tell you about my experience. So before we go on, down below in the comments, tell me about a game that you revisited because you originally struggled and you wanted to give it a second chance, and you're embarrassed to admit that you had to go back and play it because you just didn't get it the first time. Down below in the comments, tell me. Anyway, welcome to my review of Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Navigating the dark halls of Brennenburg Castle is honestly hella atmospheric. The way the light and the darkness they play with each other in the halls is just... love it. And something me and my audience noticed right away is the game is dark. And one of my audience members also noted on how I played the game significantly darker than they ever would. I like my games dark. And honestly, it might be a major contributor for my obsession with OLED monitors, which I would love to play this game on an OLED. Samsung, if you're watching this, let's promote some OLED monitors together. Make a fat buck. Anyway, I bet it's gorgeous on an OLED monitor, like absolutely gorgeous. The game is dark, so what? Well, the darkness is basically its own being in this game. It feels alive. It feels like it wants you to perish within the walls of Brennenburg sooner than later. And I found that to be honestly quite refreshing. In other games, the darkness can be used to conceal the player and creatures, but in Amnesia, the darkness is usually the creature. So what am I getting at with this? Well, Daniel, the player character, is afraid of the dark. The more time he spends in the darkness, the lower his sanity drops. And oh yeah, the sanity meter. It is honestly one of my favorite features in the game. When Daniel spends a lot of time in the darkness or sees things that upset him, his sanity lowers. And a low sanity can do a large number of things to the player. Now, I didn't experience all the game had to offer in terms of like negative effects for low sanity, but I want to talk about a couple of my favorite experiences. One of which are the hallucinations that make Daniel like drop to the ground and cower in fear. It's kind of quirky, it's kind of cool. And then there's another one where there's like a huge input delay between you and Daniel, you the player and the player character Daniel, and it's really cool. And it makes you feel like there are some consequences to messing about too long. And while I have the consequences pulled up, let's talk about consequences. I do not like that there are no real consequences for death or insanity. And it's honestly, from my experience, a running theme in all of the games. I like fail states. I like failing. I enjoy the process of getting good. Now, when you do lose all your health or your sanity, you just faint and you wake up in a nearby room with more health or sanity than you likely had before, making the area now just a little easier than it was before, which I do not like. However, because of the lack of consequences, I am more likely to recommend Amnesia to people who are new to the genre over things like Alien Isolation or Dead Space. The lack of consequences has a really wonderful effect of making the game very accessible, and I think that can be especially important when you're trying to grow the genre and create new fans. As you navigate the halls, you find notes and experience flashbacks which tell you more about both yourself and Alexander, the Lord of the Castle. Now, these really help establish that we really only know as much as Daniel does about all of this. And there's really no information gained that the player nor Daniel know exclusively of one another. And I love that kind of stuff. The dance between the light and the darkness it's a really special one in Amnesia, and I genuinely enjoyed that. I do wish there were more consequences to my failures, but the way the lore is divulged to the player is really quite nice. I find Amnesia to be a wonderfully immersive experience, and I had no problems whatsoever diving face first and experiencing the world as Daniel did. And I mean, realistically, I was often just as afraid as he was, in many cases. Great game. So, like many games in the horror genre, Amnesia is a walking simulator. But for once, I can't compare it to PT. I have to compare PT to it. So if you're unclear on what a walking simulator is, it is a game with no combat mechanics, just walking and puzzle solving generally. So what the game is. And as I've said before, I have no issues with walking simulators, but this one is quite unique, as the formula for walking simulator, narrative driven horror games, it hadn't been standardized at this point. This was the first. I mean, if we're not counting Fear, I'm not counting Fear because Fear was a first person shooter first and foremost, but Amnesia was the first of its kind, and its DNA can be felt everywhere. So you can walk and run and hide from monsters through the shadow. Something cool though, if you look at the monsters, even if it doesn't detect you immediately, like you lose sanity, right? And if you look at it long enough, it will detect you. And I thought that was kind of freaking cool. That's a cool mechanic. The player generally walks or runs through the dark halls with a lantern that quickly burns fuel, which needs to be refilled quite often, either from oil items scattered throughout or an oil container, which can be found through key items in the game. Now, littered throughout the world are torches, like on the walls and stuff, and you can use the tinderbox items to light them to create a small safe zone, but that light is mostly permanent. There's a few exceptions, but you can generally consider those light sources permanent. As an example, when you go to the cistern, when you hit certain points in the puzzle, an ominous wind blows through, near you specifically, and it extinguishes all the lit flames near you. Now, the sanity mechanic helps reel the player, and it works actively to keep you on task. As you make progress and hit certain milestones, you recover sanity. Now, I'm not going to discuss the various adverse effects of the sanity system itself. I kind of did a deep dive while looking up this part, and I kind of wish that I hadn't. That knowledge is forbidden, and the mystery of the sanity system is far better than knowing what it is and how it works. I really don't know what else to say here. Not a lot of mechanics to discuss, and it is once again a walking simulator. And unsurprisingly, it is not the last walking simulator you will see this year for me. There are plenty more where this came from. Amnesia honestly has such a great story, and it does the whole amnesia thing really well. So the story is you went on an expedition to the Tin Hanan tomb, where you acquired an orb that bestowed upon Daniel, you the player character, a curse where a shadow follows and hunts him. So he looks for information regarding the orb, and he finds a few experts, all of which end up dead as a result of this curse. Eventually, this dude Alexander contacts him, and he's all like, "Hey man, I can totally help you with that." And so through Alexander, Daniel learns of the vitae, which is harvested from living organisms through extreme pain and terror. Real nasty shit. So Daniel goes from being this regular dude to an absolute psychopath in an attempt to collect as much vitae as possible. He would feed his victims an elixir that basically forced amnesia so they could never get used to the torture. So basically these people, they wake up every day alone and afraid, not remembering anything, only to be tortured nearly to death daily. Now, one day, in a fit of rage, Daniel accidentally kills one of the victims who were just trying to escape. It was a young girl. Now, this sent him into a guilt spiral. Now, during all of this, two things were happening. One, Alexander is actually a multi-dimensional being who is manipulating Daniel into collecting the vitae in order to use his orb to get back home. And two, applying the vitae to the orb is actively enraging the shadow, making the curse far more powerful and the shadow far more angry. So when Alexander begins the ritual, Daniel vowed to get his revenge, and he drinks the amnesia potion for himself to overcome his tremendous guilt that he carried in hopes of putting a stop to Alexander. So at this point, Daniel wakes up from the amnesia potion and begins his journey, and this version of Daniel knows none of what I just told you, and neither do you. This is where the game starts. And in the journey to the inner sanctum, both you and him learn all of this together. And I think that's pretty rad. Daniel's journey to the inner sanctum is potentially a journey of redemption for him. Depending on the choices you make, a number of things can happen. I chose to redeem Daniel. He started torturing all those people because he was being manipulated by Alexander. But at some point, he started to enjoy himself a little bit and lost control, causing him to kill one of his victims. Did he deserve to be redeemed? I don't really know. It seemed like the right thing to do. It seemed like the right choice. Alexander lied about helping Daniel and was likely hiding something further from Daniel. I thought he was hiding something far more malicious than wanting to just go home, and I felt that I needed to stop him by all means. And when you choose to stop him, the shadow recognizes the sacrifice you are making, and it ends the curse with Alexander, which is pretty cool. The story is honestly pretty rad, and I really enjoyed it. This is why I play video games. I love a good story. Now, while I only got one ending, I found that ending to just be wholly satisfying. If you're looking for a good story, Amnesia is a really great pick. Amnesia preys on your ignorance. The sanity system is shrouded in so much mystery, so we assume things about it and the world of the game, and we're the reasons we suffer the most in the game. Much like the story, the wounds we suffer from in game are generally self-inflicted, and we don't even realize it. When we stay too long in the darkness, we assume something will come get us if we don't start moving. Move too loudly and you might summon a brute to your location. Hell, even solving some of the puzzles can be pretty scary. The elevator stuff in particular, the machinery was loud when I started it, so I immediately assumed something was coming and went straight out to hide into a corner. It was awesome. I don't find the brutes to be all that scary when they get close. However, from a distance, they are pretty intimidating and like ominous. But the second they're like within striking range, it's just like, okay, you look like a messed up sack boy or like the seamstress from 9 or something. To return to a previous topic, I find that once you realize there's like no consequences for dying or going insane, really, it kind of dulls the experience. Interestingly, this was an issue I had with Amnesia Rebirth, which I've played long before I played this one. Having no consequence, for me at least, makes the game less scary. Like, don't get me wrong, the game is undoubtedly scary, but with real consequences set in place, I feel this game could be as terrifying as Darkwood is. Amnesia is honestly, it's a phenomenal experience. Between accessibility to new players in the genre and it's an incredible atmosphere, and then the sheer horror the devs are willing to put the player through, it is a non-stop ride of being scared. And if I'm a little honest, This game kind of made me a little scared of the dark while I was playing it. Truly incredible. So, if you are an avid fan of the genre and want to introduce someone to the genre, maybe a spouse or a partner, hell, even a child, this is the game you should do it with. As an example, there's a popular game on Roblox called Doors, and my daughter loved that game. I played it with her and noticed immediately how incredibly similar it was to Amnesia. So, eventually, when she got a little bit bigger, I introduced her to it, and ooh-wee, she loved it. Just for reference, my daughter is 11 and loves horror games, like absolutely loves them. So if you have a kid in your life and they like horror games, and it's obviously at the parents' discretion, but if you feel that they can handle real scary games, Amnesia is a great choice. Should you buy Amnesia? Yeah, you should. I think you should. It was made by a very small team, a very passionate indie team who still, to this very day in 2024, still support the game. It's available on PC, Linux, Mac, PS4, Xbox, Switch, Android, maybe even iOS. I'm not too sure on that. It's fucking iOS. Who the hell knows what's going on with those guys? Anyway, on Android, it's not called Amnesia, but it's called Sclerosis. I was a little confused when I looked it up myself, but here you go. Here's that information if you wanted to get this for your Android phone. Sclerosis, SC. Here, I'll spell it out for you right here. This is the word, sclerosis. The Switch Amnesia collection released back in 2019, and as I'm writing this script, was $2.99 USD, which is a steal for 2 games and a DLC. So it's still being well supported. Welcome to the end of the video. I appreciate that you made it this far. Now down below you will find in the description my various social links, which include Patreon, TikTok, Twitch, to which I stream every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time on Twitch. The stream is where my reviews happen. So if you happen to be interested in seeing that, I encourage you to join. Also, all horror streams are simultaneously streamed here on YouTube. So if you're interested in watching that on YouTube, hit the subscribe button right here while you're here, and you can watch that. I stream it here now. That's a new thing. I started doing that for the game we're doing now, Resident Evil, which playing right now. I'm filming this on Sunday, and tomorrow's Monday. Monday will be a Resident Evil stream. Bada bing, bada boom. Oh, I also have a Discord channel, so if you're interested in joining that, that's below, which can be found nest in my website down there, deadscenemedia.com. That one has all of my socials, which is really great. Well, again, thank you for watching the entire video. But this is it. This is the end. That's the video. Slosh out.